In this video, I'm going to cover measures that I've taken to prevent further damage and continuous function of the rear diff, and why the axle seal wasn't replaced at the shop. So what's interesting is I took this car to a Volvo specialist shop, and they looked at the rust underneath and said that it isn't that bad to keep and work on. I kind of knew the rust isn't too pretty on this car, but I got this car for a really good price. And it's a Montreal car. And anyone who lives in Eastern Canada knows that Montreal cars get bombarded by salt. There's lots of potholes and lots of snow removal. So those cars go through a very difficult time. But the people at the Volvo shop still said that this is typical of P1 Volvos and just 2000 Ford era Volvos anyways. So I said, okay. Then I took it to another general mechanic, which is the one that was supposed to change the axle seal. And they had also seen underneath the car, and they said that it was decent, it's fine to work on. But once I took the car to them this time, they actually called me and turned down doing the axle seal job because they said it would take 6 hours due to having to cut all the bolts in the rear multi-link to get out the axle. I took it to a shop because I knew it was going to be a difficult job. But they pretty much said that it's going to be between $600 to $800 to do it. So what I've done is just topped off the diff fluid as best as I can in winter outside. You're going to see that in the later parts of this video in case you have a similar situation. But this axle seal is going to be done in spring. And for those of you getting these cars, if you can get a Western, Southwestern one, that's great because it's easier to work on the rear end. With the rust, it's going to be a very tricky job. I'm going to have to cut bolts that run through control arms. That's where they said most of these seize, and I'll change the axle seal. I might just end up topping it off for a long time, and we'll see how long it lasts like that if I don't get around to changing it. But just stay tuned, and we'll keep updating this series as we go on and see how that the diff does. And the all-wheel drive has been working and is still working. I also got this job quoted with providing the $40 axle seal at the Volvo dealership when I was there, and they said it's a 2-hour job, but due to the rust, most likely they charge $180 an hour, so it would have came out to a $500-600 job, if not more, at the dealer. But what's important is one of the head technicians that had been working there for about 25 years came to the front when we were talking about an older Volvo, and he said that the whole putting the diff fluid in and then extracting a little bit as per Vita that I've seen in other videos, I'm not going against that, but what I've heard from many mechanics and this Volvo tech specifically was that they just fill it until it flows out of the fill hole, and then the gears pull in the oil and you don't need to extract or top off afterwards. In this case, it's not a big deal because the axle seal is leaking, but I'm going to do the fluids like this and we'll see how that goes. The shop that refused the job this time is also very experienced, and they said they would do the same thing. Just put the fluid in, let it leak out, and put the plug back in, and they've never had any issues with these cars. So that's your call on it, but you can also stay tuned with my series to see if anything goes wrong with this car's all-wheel drive and all the other fluids that we're going to do, such as the angle gear and the transmission. And it's not to say that they refused the job at that shop. They just said they're in the middle of winter tire season, and at the same time, with the way that those bolts are going to have to be cut, they would have to be sourcing control arms, and that multi-link system in the back of the all-wheel drive Volvos is complicated, and there's just a lot of time and parts that could be needed. So this job could easily go from $300 to $1,000, needing a lot of parts and time. So it's something that we're going to tackle on this car most likely next spring or in the summer, or we'll keep topping off the diff fluid. So now we're going to go to the part where I top off the diff fluid on the driveway. So what it took to get the differential plug out was just a normal size ratchet, not a bigger one, because clearances are very important here. A short, about 3-inch extension and a small 13mm. And it was very tight, so I put this end of scaffolding or something as a cheater bar on it, and I was able to crack it loose. If you go with anything bigger than this, it won't fit. So use your own stuff for reference, but this piece here, you can locate it. The rear diff is here.
your ratchet is gonna go in from the side here, okay, from behind this, and that's how you're going to get the bolt loose. It's right there in the middle of the screen. There's 2 bolts there. I undid the one closest to the back of the car. So for reference, here's the axle, driver's side, coming over past that little metal bar. Here's the diff, and just squeezed in here, right there. I'm going to reach in from the back and point at it. You want to undo the one closest to the back. So just in case it helps, there's the bar there. Once the plug was out, that's what it looks like. Fortunately, the rearmost plug does smell like gear oil, so it is the right plug. There was a copper washer that came off. I'm going to reuse it. You should probably replace this though. It also feels like gear oil. I'm going to jack up the other rear side of the car before filling. Technically, you should have the car fully level, front and rear, in order to do this job properly. I'm outside on a slanted driveway, so this is the best I can do. And this will in a way be an experiment of filling up the fluid and seeing if it's going to have too much inside, but this is not the proper way to do it, lifting up only the 2 rear wheels. Another reason that I don't care for getting slightly too much fluid into this diff is because it still does have the axle seal leak, and it's going to leak out the fluid anyways before the fluid heats up too much because it's contained in there. So in this case it's fine, but if you've replaced parts and you're doing it, make sure to jack up the car on all 4s, completely level, fill up to the fill hole, let it drain out. Then the gear will pull stuff in and it'll naturally lower the level a bit. I wouldn't extract if I were you, but if you want to do it that way, that would be fine too. But this will be an ongoing series of experiments with these rear diffs on Volvos that I get, and we'll see if anything goes wrong with mine or if they end up being fine. So now we've got the car jacked up, both sides on the rear. I'm gonna go underneath with a syringe and fill the diff fluid until it leaks out of the fill hole. What I'm doing here is only a safe measure to top off the diff until I have the time in the spring to do the actual axle seal job, because it's going to be a lot of work. This is a 150 milliliter syringe with a piece of clear tubing on the end. I bought the syringe from Amazon, the pipe from Home Depot, and Liqui-Moly 7590 gear oil. There you can see it leaking out. We'll put the drain plug in once it stops and see how it does throughout the winter. As you can see, I've ended up with a gear oil spill, which is pretty normal when you're working with gear oil. The important part here is, even though I only jacked up the rear level, there was not any fluid dripping from the fill hole when I went to fill it up. If it was leaking from there, then it would mean that this is a serious problem. But I only got a leak after I put in about 100 milliliters of fluid, and I would say about 50 of that came back out. Maybe less.